She put me at a table by the kitchen door next to the trash cans at my own son's wedding. She thought I was the hired help. That girl had no idea who she was dealing with. Hi, friends. I'm glad you're here with me today. Before we dive in, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments, and now let's step right into the story. My name is Rosemary Jackson, but there isn't a soul in Atlanta, Georgia, who calls me anything but Mama Rose. For 30 years, my kitchen, Mama Rose's Sweet Soul Kitchen, has been the heart of this city, or at least my part of it. I've catered joy and I've catered grief. I've fed mayors on election night and hungry folks from the shelter on Thanksgiving. My sweet potato pie has sealed business deals, and my fried chicken has mended broken hearts. My life is built on honest work and the love of my community, and my pride, my whole world, is my son, Marcus. He's a good boy, a brilliant boy, a talented architect who just made partner at one of the biggest firms downtown. He pulled himself up with my help and God's grace, and he shines so bright it sometimes makes my eyes water. His fiancée, Tiffany Sinclair, she shines too, but it's a different kind of light. It's a cold, hard light like a diamond under a jeweler's lamp. She's the kind of woman with perfect hair even in 90% humidity and a smile that's all teeth and no warmth. Her family, the Sinclairs, they're not just rich. They're what people around here call old money. They live up in Buckhead, in one of those sprawling white houses with columns out front, looking like it was plucked right out of a history book, one that forgets to mention how all that money got made in the first place. They move in circles I've only ever served food to. They don't see people like me. They see wallpaper. They see the help. The first alarm bell rang soft like a little silver chime you'd barely notice. It was a Tuesday evening, and Tiffany had come over to discuss the engagement party guest list. She sat at my kitchen table, the very table where Marcus learned to do his multiplication, and tapped a perfectly manicured nail on my handwritten list. I had my church sisters, my cousins from Macon, and the crew from my kitchen, the people who were my real family. Tiffany cleared her throat, a delicate sound. "Rosemary," she began, and that was the first thing. Nobody calls me Rosemary. We're trying to keep the engagement party intimate, for family and close business associates. She scanned my list, her nose wrinkling just a tiny bit. "Do we really need to invite your entire church choir?" I kept my hands busy, wiping down a counter that was already spotless. "They're family, Tiffany. They prayed for Marcus through every exam he ever took." "Of course," she said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that didn't reach her eyes. "It's just, their energy can be a bit much for my parents." She then pointed to the names of my head chef and my two oldest servers. "And these are your employees. They're my right and left hands," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "They've known Marcus since he was in diapers." "That's sweet, but it might be confusing for the other guests if the catering staff is mingling." Catering staff. The words hung in the air, thick and sour. My people, my family, reduced to a job title. Marcus, sensing the temperature in the room drop 20 degrees, jumped in. "Honey, they're like aunts to me. It's fine." He gave me a look, a little pleading one that said, "Just go along with it, Mama. Tiffany's just stressed with all the planning. Aren't you, baby?" She gave him a dazzling smile. Completely overwhelmed. I just nodded. But I knew. Oh, I knew. I've been a black woman in the South for 65 years. I know the difference between a person being stressed and a person being a snob. Chile, I can smell that particular brand of poison a mile away, and this girl was soaked in it. That first little chime soon became a clanging alarm I couldn't ignore. By May, just a few months before the wedding, my side of the guest list had been sliced and diced like onions for a gumbo. My church sisters, the ones whose prayers had supposedly carried Marcus through college, were now deemed too loud. My cousin Ray, who runs his own successful plumbing business, was apparently not the right social fit. Tiffany had a way of cutting people out that was as swift and clean as a surgeon's knife. She'd say things like, "We have to consider the optics, Marcus," or "It's all about creating the right atmosphere." And my son, bless his heart, he was so deep in love, he couldn't see he was getting his plate full of her nonsense. One afternoon, she showed up at my house unannounced. My home is my sanctuary. It's a modest brick bungalow in a neighborhood that's seen its share of history. Every piece of furniture, every picture on the wall tells a story. She walked through my living room, her heels clicking on the hardwood floors, her eyes scanning everything. "This is a lovely home, Rosemary," she said, touching the edge of the quilt my own grandmother made. "It's so authentic." I knew that word. Authentic was what rich white folks called anything they thought was quaint and folksy, a little piece of the past they could admire before getting back in their German cars. "But," she continued, turning to face me, her expression a careful mask of concern, "my parents are hosting a pre-wedding brunch for the out-of-town guests, and they'd love to have it here, to integrate our families. The thing is, their friends are accustomed to a certain aesthetic. Perhaps we could bring in a few pieces, just to elevate the space a little." She wanted to redecorate my life's home for a 2-hour brunch. She wanted to cover up my history, my grandmother's hands, my husband's memory, to impress people who wouldn't know a real home if it fell on them. Before I could even find the right words, she pulled a small, elegant envelope from her designer handbag. "And I got this for you," she said brightly. "I know it's hard to find the right thing to wear for these events. I thought you could pick out something more appropriate." It was a gift card for $500 to a boutique in Buckhead where a scarf probably cost more than my monthly light bill. The insult was so profound, so deeply condescending, it almost took my breath away. She saw me as a charity case, someone to be managed, dressed up, and made presentable for her world. I took the card from her, my fingers brushing hers. I gave her a slow, sweet smile. The kind of smile my kitchen staff knows means trouble is brewing. "Why, thank you, Tiffany," I said, my voice smooth as butter. "That's very thoughtful of you." The final straw of that particular week came during a meeting at the Magnolia Grand Hotel, the fanciest place in town, to finalize the reception details. As we walked through the grand ballroom, the manager, a man in a crisp suit, came to greet us. Tiffany took the lead immediately. She turned to him, gesturing vaguely in my direction. "And this," she said, her voice loud and clear, "is Marcus's mother. She runs a cute little catering business of her own." Cute. Little. My business, Mama Rose's Sweet Soul Kitchen, which I built from nothing over 30 years. The business that put my son through the best architectural school in the country. The business that has a 3-month waiting list and has catered for every Atlanta celebrity, politician, and movie star that's come through this town. She made it sound like I sold Kool-Aid and cookies from a card table on my front lawn. She didn't know. She hadn't bothered to learn a single thing about me. She didn't know that the man she was talking to, Mr. Robert Harris, the owner of the entire Magnolia Grand Hotel chain, was an old, dear friend. Robert's eyes met mine over her perfectly styled blonde head. He didn't even blink. He just gave me the slightest, most respectful nod. 10 years ago, his daughter's wedding caterer had backed out at the last minute. 200 guests and no food. I got the call at 10 in the morning for a 6 o'clock reception. My crew and I, we pulled off a miracle. Robert never forgot it. He told me then, "Rose, if you ever need anything, you just call." I just smiled and extended my hand to him politely, playing my part. "A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Harris," I said. He shook my hand warmly. "The pleasure is all mine, Ms. Jackson." The way he said my name, with such respect, was a direct contradiction to Tiffany's dismissive introduction. Tiffany didn't notice. She was too busy pointing out where she wanted the ice sculpture to go. But I saw. And Robert saw. He saw the whole story in that one moment. I kept that smile on my face, the calm, placid one that looks like acceptance. But inside, a storm was gathering force. Love makes you blind, I kept telling myself, looking at my son's adoring face as he watched his fiancée. It makes you deaf and dumb, too. But Lord, I started to wonder, how long was I supposed to let my boy wander around in the dark? The end of my patience arrived on a hot day in June, just 3 weeks before the wedding. It came in a crisp, cream-colored folder, delivered by Tiffany herself. She was breathless, excited, talking a mile a minute about floral arrangements and string quartets. I just poured her a glass of sweet tea and waited. Finally, she pulled out a large, glossy sheet of paper, the seating chart. "I wanted you to see it first," she said, beaming. "We finally locked it in." She spread it out on my dining room table. It was a sea of circles and names in elegant script. Table 1, front and center, was for the bride and groom. Tables 2 and 3 were for the Sinclair family and their closest friends. Tables 4 and 5 were for Marcus's new partners at his firm. I scanned the chart, my eyes moving further and further from the head table, past the colleagues, past the distant cousins, all the way to the back of the grand ballroom. And there it was, table number 18. Tucked away in the corner, right next to the swinging double doors that led to the hotel kitchen. The table that gets all the noise, all the traffic, and the first whiff of the garbage bins out back. And at that table, there was one name. Rosemary Jackson. I stared at it. I wasn't seated with family. I wasn't even seated with friends. I was seated with the overflow, the last-minute additions, the nobodies. I was placed at the very edge of my own son's celebration, a forgotten footnote in the story of his new life. "It was just so tricky with the layout, Rosemary," Tiffany said, the words rushing out. She wouldn't look me in the eye. She was busy tracing the lines on the chart with her finger. "The main tables are really for family and, important business partners. People Marcus needs to impress. It all just sort of fell into place this way. Important people." There was that phrase again, the phrase that sorted the world into those who mattered and those who did not. And in her world, the mother of the groom clearly did not matter. My eyes drifted up to the mantelpiece, to the framed photograph of my late husband, David. He was a proud man, a strong man. He worked 2 jobs his whole life so I could start my business, and Marcus could have every book he ever needed. He would have taken one look at this piece of paper, folded it neatly, and set it on fire. He would never have allowed his wife, the mother of his child, to be treated with such profound disrespect. In that instant, looking at his smiling face, something inside me didn't just snap. It shattered. The part of me that was making excuses for her, the part that was trying to be patient for my son's sake, the part that was quietly swallowing insult after insult, it all just turned to dust. I was done. Enough was enough. I took a slow sip of my tea. I looked up at Tiffany and gave her that same calm, placid smile. "It looks lovely, dear," I said, my voice as steady as a rock. "I'm sure it was very complicated. I understand completely." Relief washed over her face. She believed me. She thought she had won. She thought I was a simple old woman who knew her place. "Wonderful," she chirped, gathering her things. "I knew you'd be reasonable." As soon as the front door clicked shut behind her, I walked over to the phone. My hands weren't even shaking. They were perfectly still. I picked up the receiver and dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang twice. "Dee, it's Rose." "Hey, Rosie, what's cooking, cousin?" Her cheerful voice boomed through the line. My voice was low and clear. All the warmth was gone. "I need you to do something for me. I need you to find out everything there is to know about a woman named Tiffany Sinclair. And I mean everything. Her business, her family, her finances. Dig deep, Dee. I want to see the bones." There was a pause on the other end. My cousin Denise, a retired APD detective, knew that tone of voice. It was the one I used when a supplier tried to cheat me or when someone threatened my family. It was the voice that meant the sweet soul of Mama Rose was done being sweet. "Say no more, cousin," Dee said, her own voice turning serious. "Consider it done." My cousin Denise, who I call Dee, is not a big woman. She's small and wiry with eyes that don't miss a thing. She spent 35 years as a detective with the Atlanta Police Department, and she's got a mind like a steel trap and a nose for lies that could sniff out a sinner in a sanctuary. When I told her to dig, I knew she'd bring a shovel. What she brought back was a whole backhoe. She started with Sinclair Designs, Tiffany's interior design firm. On the surface, it was all gloss and shine, magazine spreads and Southern living, a portfolio of minimalist mansions in Buckhead, and a website full of glowing testimonials. It looked like the very picture of success. But Dee, she's never been one to trust a pretty picture. She started talking to people, not the clients, but the little folks. The painters, the wallpaper hangers, the interns who came and went through that office like it had a revolving door. What she found underneath all that gloss was pure rot. It started with the interns. Tiffany had a system. She'd go to the Savannah College of Art and Design, ESCAD, and find the brightest, most desperate young talents. She'd offer them a prestigious, unpaid internship. They'd work for months, pouring their fresh ideas and their souls into projects for her. Then she'd take their best work, unique furniture design, an innovative floor plan, and present it to clients as her own creation. When the internship was over, she'd send them packing with a vague promise of a recommendation, and they'd see their exact designs in a magazine 6 months later under the name Tiffany Sinclair. She was a vampire feeding on the creativity of the young. Then Dee followed the money, or rather, the lack of it. She uncovered a mountain of debt that would make your head spin. Tiffany owed $500,000, $500,000, to fabric suppliers in New York, to custom furniture makers in North Carolina, to local artists she'd commissioned and never paid. She was living on brand new credit, robbing Peter to pay Paul, building a palace of prestige on a foundation of bounced checks and broken promises. Her business wasn't a business, it was a shell game. But the cherry on top of this mess, the real kicker, came when Dee took a friend of hers, a journalist, out for coffee. This friend worked for the biggest trade magazine in the country, Design and Decor Digest. And it turned out they were in the final stages of a massive exposé on Sinclair Designs. They had interviews with former interns, copies of unpaid invoices, side-by-side comparisons of the students' original sketches and Tiffany's award-winning work. It was a journalistic kill shot. And the publication date? The Monday morning right after the wedding. Dee laid it all out for me on my kitchen table, a neat stack of papers that was the ugliest thing I'd ever seen. Suddenly, everything made sense. The desperation to marry Marcus, a successful man from a good family with a bright financial future. The lavish wedding, designed to be a grand spectacle to reinforce her fake status right before it all came crashing down. This wedding wasn't a celebration of love. It was a lifeboat. It was her last desperate attempt to rebrand herself as Mrs. Marcus Jackson before the world found out that Tiffany Sinclair was a fraud and a thief. On Friday morning, the day before the wedding was supposed to happen, my kitchen was filled with the smell of cinnamon and baking peaches. I was making my famous cobbler, my hands moving through the familiar motions of slicing fruit and rolling dough. My kitchen has always been my place of power. It's where I create, where I think. As my hands worked, my mind was clear and calm. I knew what I had. Now I just needed the final piece. The phone rang just as I was putting the cobbler in the oven. I knew it was her before I even picked it up. I pressed the receiver to my ear, and with my other hand, I pressed the record button on the small digital recorder Dee had left me. 30 years in business teaches you a lot of things. The most important one, always have your receipts. Rosemary, we need to have a serious talk. Tiffany's voice came through the line, slick and condescending. I'm listening, Tiffany, said, my voice even. She took a deep breath, the sound of a person about to deliver a lecture they've practiced in front of a mirror. I want you to understand something, she said, her tone like she was explaining gravity to a 5-year-old. There's a difference between people who have money and people who have class. It's not about the size of your bank account. It's about breeding. It's about knowing how to behave in certain circles. It's about heritage. I stayed silent, letting her spin her own rope. Marcus is entering a different world now, she continued, her voice gaining confidence. He's a partner at a major firm. He's going to be dealing with CEOs, with old Atlanta families, with people who matter. And he needs to leave some things behind to fit in. He needs to shed a certain image. My knuckles were white on the counter's edge, but my voice was pure honey when I spoke. What exactly are you asking me to do, Tiffany? This was the moment. She could have backtracked. She could have softened it. She did not. I think it would be best for everyone, she said slowly and deliberately, if your people didn't come to the reception tomorrow. It will make my family and our business associates more comfortable. Maybe you could host a separate party for them later, something more their style. A barbecue in the park, perhaps, after our real wedding is over. A barbecue in the park, for the people she deemed unimportant. For my family. For me. Segregation, plain and simple, dressed up in a $5,000 dress. She wanted to hide us, to erase us from the picture of her perfect new life. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment. Then I said, my voice soft and agreeable, I see. You've given this a lot of thought. I'm just thinking of Marcus's future, she said, a note of triumph in her voice. Yes, dear, I said into the phone. You're absolutely right. I hung up. I stood in my quiet kitchen, the sweet smell of peaches all around me. I picked up the little recorder and pressed play. Her voice, arrogant and cruel, filled my sanctuary. She had just handed me a loaded gun, and I fully intended to use it. The first call I made was to Mr. Robert Harris at the Magnolia Grand. His personal assistant put me right through. Robert, it's Rose Jackson. Rose, to what do I owe the pleasure? I trust you're not calling to save another one of my weddings, he chuckled. Not exactly, Robert, I said. I'm calling to stop one. Do you remember telling me a long time ago that you owed me a favor? His voice turned serious. I remember it like it was yesterday. What do you need? I need you to cancel the Sinclair Jackson wedding reception for tomorrow night. Find a reason, a big one. There was no hesitation, no questions, just trust, built over a decade. Consider it done, Rose. I believe our main ballroom is about to suffer. A catastrophic plumbing failure. Such a shame. Thank you, Robert, I said, and that was that. Door number 1 slammed shut and bolted. 10 minutes later, I made the second call. Tiffany, being the meticulous planner she was, had a backup venue, the Piedmont Park Conservancy Ballroom. The director there is a woman named Patricia, a sweet lady whose daughter got married 5 years ago on a shoestring budget. I catered the whole affair for what it cost me in ingredients and paid my staff out of my own pocket. I told her it was my gift. Patricia, darling, it's Mama Rose. Rose, how are you? I was just thinking about your lemon chess pie the other day. I'm fine, sweetheart. Listen, I need to ask you for something, and I need you to trust me. The Sinclair party booked for tomorrow. I need you to cancel it. A moment of confused silence. But it's your son's wedding, isn't it? Just trust me on this, Patricia. It's what's best for my son. That's all she needed to hear. Of course, Rose. The ballroom was just double booked by mistake. A terrible administrative error. I'll call them right now. Door number 2, locked tight. The third call was to a trendy art gallery downtown where they had planned the rehearsal dinner. The owner's wife is in my church choir. The fourth was to a rooftop loft space she had on a provisional hold. My cousin Ray, the plumber she didn't want at her wedding, had fixed the owner's busted pipes for free last Christmas Eve. 5th, 6th, 7th, a historic manor, a country club, a botanical garden. For 30 years, my food had been the centerpiece of this city's life. I'd catered the openings, the closings, the christenings, and the funerals. My network wasn't a list of names in a planner. It was a web of favors given, of kindnesses exchanged, of trust earned one plate of macaroni and cheese at a time. This was my real power, not money, not status, but the social capital I had built with my own two hands. By 1 o'clock that afternoon, Tiffany Sinclair's perfect, exclusive, 5-star wedding had nowhere to go. Every suitable door in the city of Atlanta had been politely and firmly closed in her face. The call from Marcus came late that afternoon. I was sitting on my porch, watching the world go by, feeling a strange calm I hadn't felt in months. When the phone rang, I knew it was him. A mother knows. His voice was tight with panic, stretched thin like a wire about to snap. "Mom, Mom, something crazy is happening. Something's wrong." I took a slow breath, making my voice sound soft and concerned. "What is it, baby? What's the matter?" "The Magnolia Grand just canceled on us. They said a main pipe burst and the whole ballroom is flooded. And then Patricia from the park called, said they'd double-booked the ballroom. Every single place, Mom. Every backup we had is calling with some insane excuse. The art gallery is having an electrical emergency. The country club suddenly has a fumigation problem. It doesn't make any sense." I listened, letting him pour out his confusion and fear. I made soft, sympathetic noises into the phone. "Oh my goodness, son. That's just terrible luck." "Luck? This isn't luck," he said, his voice rising. "Tiffany's hysterical. She's falling apart. She's screaming that it's sabotage, that someone is doing this on purpose to ruin everything." I waited. I knew what was coming next. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was lower, hesitant. She asked me something crazy, Mom. She asked if you knew any of these people. She asked if this was your doing." The world on my porch, the quiet street, the chirping birds, it all went silent. My heart, which had been so steady all day, gave a painful squeeze. This was the moment I had dreaded and prepared for. "What did you tell her, Marcus?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. There was another pause, a long, heavy one. "I told her she was being ridiculous," he said, and I could hear he was trying to sound confident, to reassure himself as much as me. "I told her that's a crazy thing to say. I told her you run a catering business, that you're the sweetest person in the world and you wouldn't know how to do something like this. I said you couldn't possibly have that kind of influence." He said it to defend me, but every word was a knife. "You just run a catering business. You couldn't possibly have that kind of influence." He had no idea who I was. After all these years, after everything I had built, my own son saw me through Tiffany's eyes, a nice, simple woman who makes good food. He saw my strength as sweetness, my reach as a hobby. He believed in her version of the world, where power only came from big houses and old names. The disrespect from Tiffany had been infuriating. But this underestimation from my own child, that was a pain so deep it felt like it might split me in two. Cornered and frantic, Tiffany did what her kind always does. She tried to seize control of the story. She went on the offensive. That evening, a video appeared on her Instagram page. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. She was sitting in her parents' immaculate living room, bathed in soft, forgiving light. Her makeup was perfect, save for a single glistening tear tracing a path down her cheek. "My friends, my family," she began, her voice trembling just so. "I'm coming to you with a heavy heart. My wedding, the happiest day of my life, is under attack." She never said my name. She was too clever for that. Instead, she spoke in vague, poisonous terms. She talked about unethical business practices from those who were jealous of her success. She hinted at people from a different background who didn't understand what it meant to have a legacy and a name to protect. It was a dog whistle, loud and clear, to her wealthy friends in Buckhead, a call to arms for the privileged, and at first it worked. The comments section flooded with support. "We love you, Tiff." "Stay strong, they're just haters." Class always wins in the end. Her friends, the sons and daughters of the important people, circled the wagons. It was them against the world. I watched the video once, my face impassive. I would not play her game. I would not record a tearful response. I would not engage in a public screaming match. My power wasn't in performance, it was in truth. I went to the Facebook page for Mama Rose's Sweet Soul Kitchen. It has over 50,000 followers, a mix of loyal customers, fellow business owners, and just folks from the community. I didn't write a long story. I didn't make accusations. I just wrote one simple, quiet post. It said, "Before you talk about legacy and heritage, it's worth asking yourself if that legacy includes stealing the work of young, hopeful artists to build a fraudulent career." And beneath that one sentence, I attached a single image. It was a high-resolution scan of an email, dug up by Dee, an email from Tiffany's corporate account to her assistant. The subject line read, "Client presentation, use this." Attached was the portfolio of a young man from Escad, and the body of the email was one clear, damning instruction. Recreate these furniture sketches under our company letterhead, change the color of the sofa to blue, and delete this email when you're done. I didn't add any other comments. I didn't need to. I just posted it. Simple, clean, and absolutely lethal. My post was a single match thrown into a dry field. The fire spread faster than I could have imagined. The first person to share it was a young designer named Jamal Davis. He was the student from the email. He shared my post and added his own story, his words full of a pain that was years old. "This is my work," he wrote. "I was that unpaid intern. Tiffany Sinclair told me I had no talent and would never make it in this industry. Right after she stole my entire senior portfolio. She didn't just take my designs, she tried to take my future." Jamal's post opened the floodgates. Another former intern, a young woman, came forward with a similar story and screenshots of her own original work next to photos from Tiffany's published projects. Then another and another. Within hours, a dozen young artists were telling the same story of exploitation and theft. The internet, which had been Tiffany's weapon, turned on her with a vengeance. The hashtag #NarTeamTiffany vanished, replaced by our Cancel Sinclair Designs, which started trending in Atlanta. The story was no longer about a canceled wedding. It was about a predator who built her career on the backs of trusting students. The rich friends from Buckhead went silent. Their supportive comments on Tiffany's video were quietly deleted, one by one. Even the mayor of Atlanta, who had initially liked her tearful post, unliked it with a swift, invisible click. No one with a reputation to protect wanted to be standing anywhere near Tiffany Sinclair when the truth came out. My phone started buzzing with texts from people, clients, community leaders saying, "We see what's happening, Rose. We've got your back." The story had gone viral. It was picked up by local news blogs, then the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. The narrative had been ripped from Tiffany's hands. This was no longer a family squabble playing out online. It was a full-blown corporate fraud scandal. As the sun went down, I made one last call. It wasn't to a venue owner or a client. It was to a lawyer I knew, one who represented two of the furniture companies Tiffany owed money to. I didn't give him my name. I just said, "If your clients want to see any of their money, you might want to file an emergency injunction. There's a good chance Tiffany Sinclair is at her office right now, shredding every piece of paper she can find." An hour later, as Tiffany was likely still fielding frantic calls and watching her world burn down online, two black cars pulled up to the Sinclair mansion. Men in sharp suits carrying briefcases walked up to the big white columns. The lawyers had arrived. The game was over. On Saturday, the sun shone bright and hot on the city of Atlanta. There was no wedding. There was no grand ballroom, no ice sculpture, no string quartet. Instead, my backyard was filled with the sound of laughter and the mellow groove of old-school soul music playing from a small speaker. I'd called all my unimportant people, my church sisters with their big hats and bigger hearts, my cousins who drove up from Macon, my kitchen crew who were my real family. We had ribs on the grill, a cooler full of iced tea, and a giant bowl of potato salad. It was a celebration of survival, a celebration of us. Marcus was there, standing by my side. He was quiet, his eyes shadowed with a pain and a clarity I hadn't seen in them before. The night before, I had sat him down at my kitchen table and shown him everything. Dee's entire folder, the proof of the thefts, the mountain of debt, the newspaper article that was about to drop. He read it all in silence, his face growing pale. Then I played him the recording from my phone. He listened to Tiffany's voice so full of casual cruelty, and something inside him finally, irrevocably, broke. He looked up at me, his eyes full of a shame so deep it made my own heart ache. "I'm so sorry, Mama," he'd whispered. "I was so blind." Now standing here in the sunlight, he was a different man. The spell was broken. Just as my cousin Ray was telling a loud joke, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The party quieted down. Tiffany got out, followed by her mother and a man in a stiff suit who had to be a lawyer. She marched up my driveway like a general, leading a lost cause. "Marcus, what is all this?" she demanded, gesturing with disgust at our joyful gathering. "What are you doing? This is a private matter between us." Marcus stepped forward, placing himself between her and me. His voice was steady, hard as stone. "No, Tiffany, it stopped being a private matter when it became about theft and fraud." "That's slander," her mother shrieked, clutching her pearls. "We will sue you for every penny." Marcus didn't even look at her. He kept his eyes locked on Tiffany. "You owe over $500,000. You've been stealing designs from students for years. You lied to me. You lied to everyone." Tiffany's face crumpled. "But I love you," she cried. "We were supposed to get married today." It was then that I stepped forward. I didn't say a word. I just took my phone from my apron pocket, touched the screen to connect it to the Bluetooth speaker, and turned up the volume. And then I hit play. Tiffany's own voice, cold and arrogant, filled the sudden silence of my backyard. "Marcus is entering a different world now, and he needs to leave some things behind to fit in." The sound echoed off the houses, clear as a bell. "Maybe you could host a separate party for them. A barbecue in the park, perhaps, after our real wedding is over." A collective gasp went through my guests. The Sinclair's lawyer slowly closed his briefcase with a soft click. Her mother's face was a mask of horror. A few of their well-dressed friends who had followed them for support began to back away slowly, melting into the street, wanting no part of this raw, ugly truth. Tiffany stared at me, her face a storm of fury and disbelief. She looked like she wanted to lunge, to scream, to tear the world down. But Marcus stood like a wall between us. "It's over, Tiffany," he said, and the finality in his voice was absolute. "Go home." She stood there for another moment, defeated and exposed in the bright afternoon sun. Then she turned, her shoulders slumped, and walked back to her car, leaving the ruins of her life scattered all over my lawn. That Monday, the article in Design and Decor Digest was published online. It was a digital firestorm. By noon, Tiffany Sinclair's career was not just over. It was a cautionary tale taught in design schools. A week later, Marcus came to me and told me he had resigned from his firm. He said he'd been chasing a version of success that wasn't his own, a version that required him to be blind to the things that truly mattered. He needed to build something real. He took a few months off, volunteering, helping his cousin Ray fix up houses. Then he started a small nonprofit. He used his architectural degree to offer free design and planning consultations to small businesses in the historically Black neighborhoods of Atlanta, the very kinds of places Tiffany and her family would never set foot in. He was helping barber shops expand, helping small bakeries meet city code, helping community centers build playgrounds. He was using his gifts not to climb, but to lift. It was at one of those community centers that he met Aaliyah Washington. She was the director, a smart, funny woman with a brilliant smile and eyes that saw everything. She wasn't impressed by the name of his old firm or the school he went to. She was impressed that he showed up every Saturday morning to help an old woman redesign her porch so it would be wheelchair accessible. She asked him why he wanted to help, not what he could get out of it. They fell in love not in a rush, but slowly, like a simmering pot of my best collard greens, the flavors deepening over time. She'd come over for Sunday dinner, and she'd actually help me in the kitchen instead of watching me work. She'd listen to my stories for hours, asking questions about my life, about David, about the early days of my business. She saw me, the whole of me. One evening, Marcus brought her over and I watched them on the porch swing, just talking. I saw a peace in my son's face, a genuine, soul-deep happiness that had never, not for 1 second, been there when he was with Tiffany. He had found a woman who didn't care about the polish on his shoes, but about the goodness in his heart. He had found someone who valued his soul, not his stock portfolio. A year after that disastrous Saturday, Marcus and Aaliyah got married. The wedding took place right in my backyard, under the big oak tree my David had planted. There were only 30 guests, our family, her colleagues from the center, my kitchen crew. We ate my food off of simple plates, drank sweet tea from mason jars, and danced on the grass to old Al Green records. It was perfect. It was real. Life moved on, as it always does. The story of Tiffany Sinclair faded into city lore. Marcus and Aaliyah's nonprofit flourished, and soon I became a grandmother to a beautiful baby girl they named Rose. Then, about 3 years later, on a quiet Tuesday night, as I was locking up the restaurant, a figure appeared in the doorway. It was Tiffany. I almost didn't recognize her. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple dress. She was thinner, and the hardness in her eyes had been replaced by a quiet weariness. She didn't come asking for anything. She just stood there for a moment, and then she said, "I wanted to apologize, Rosemary, for everything." She told me she had lost it all, the business, the money, her parents' respect. She said she'd spent the last 2 years in therapy, trying to figure out who she was without the Sinclair name attached. She pulled a worn piece of paper from her purse. It was a list of all the designers whose work she had stolen. "I got a job as a seamstress," she said, not looking at me. "It's not much, but every month I send each of them a little bit of what I owe. It will take me the rest of my life." She finally understood the difference between an inherited name and earned respect. I nodded and told her I wished her peace, and I meant it. That night, I came home to a house filled with light. Marcus was reading a story to little Rose, and Aaliyah was in the kitchen, humming as she warmed up some leftovers for me. I took my granddaughter in my arms, her little body warm against my chest, and looked at the family I had almost lost. I realized then that Tiffany, in her blind arrogance and cruelty, had given my son the most valuable gift of his life. She had held up a mirror to the world he was chasing, and she'd forced him to see its ugly, empty reflection. She taught him to see the difference between the price of things and the value of people. And that, honey child, is something you can't buy. That's the kind of inheritance that matters. That is true wealth.